Hi, nice to have.
Hi.
Right. Yeah.
Yes.
So I have that we did the mestizaje last time, right?
Yes, we did. Although the writing wasn't um about it, this that section.
What's that on?
Yeah. The last assignment, let me see.
Oh, was it the English?
Yes, it was the English one. It wasn't what we had spoken in our lesson.
Oh my goodness, I'm so sorry.
It's okay, no worries. Yeah.
Okay,
Um,
shoot.
it was yeah. And it was the English, and then you did a different one
Okay,
last week. Mm-hmm.
I'm sorry. Let's see here. So the
It's
English
okay.
colonial comparison. So is this one already due
Mhm. Yeah, that one we had to do already on Friday, I believe.
on Friday? Okay, shoot.
Hmm. So
Uh,
on Tuesday we were learned about the mensaje, and um, what we had to turn in was about the English. Hmm.
okay. Well, just real quickly, right? I hope that you let's see here. Uh the heck. Are you there? Sorry.
Hmm. Yes.
So the English colonial comparison, right? The first one, right, is Whig history, WHIG. The Whigs were the Liberal Party of England, and they were hoping that government would become progressively and organically grow in a direction that allowed more freedom and more participation for the common man in government. Okay. So what they try to
Okay.
do is they try to contend that they have a special historical past that gave them a legacy to be at the forefront amongst nations of the world in allowing liberty and democratic government. All right. And as I say in the beginning, in order to support that, I had to really cherry pick, right? They had their tyrants, they had their instances of inequitable society controlled by an aristocracy of some sort. Um, they yeah, they had strong, powerful kings and weak nobles, and sometimes the kings and nobles ruled at the expense of the common people. But what I did is I tried to look for the light, right, in the dark, and so I don't know how convincing my data is, but I use the fact, first of all, right, that the Romans were very like Tacitus, the famous Roman historian, was impressed by how kind of independent minded the Celtic people were and how they did not want to be ruled by anybody else, and they were decentralized and didn't want to be ruled by any single entity or king or man. And then I went forward to the Angles and Saxons, and they too, right, allowed a very decentralized system deliberately. They allowed them to have their hundreds, their villages of 100, with elected representatives and judges and trial by peers. Then when you have it was tougher to find data for the Normans. The Norman conquest was 1066. They were Norsemen from Norway, but they had colonized France. So they came from France across, that little strip of the North Sea to invade England in 1066. And they really formed quite an aristocracy. And yeah, it was tough to find any kind of data that supported a Whig interpretation during that time. But you also had the Danes from Denmark, and the Danes they allowed a dual legal system, one for the Danish people and English common law and all this the traditions and laws of the English they got to keep in that dual system. So that was pretty impressive. And then, of course, then I went to particular things. You had a couple individuals fight for the beginnings of Parliament as early as the 1300s. You had the Magna Carta in 1215, right? That magnified the rule of law rather than the rule of man or woman, and trial by peers, equal protection under the law for all, and limited government by the monarch. And then, of course, I jump forward to the 1600s with the English Civil War. Charles I claimed he could rule any way he wanted, and he lost his head for it. He had a civil war, he lost, and the pro-parliament Roundheads won, and of course, the Glorious Revolution in 1688. James II was declared no longer the king when he left the country, and they declared William and Mary. William was from Orange, Denmark, or Holland, Netherlands, and they first had to promise, take an oath to the supremacy of the Constitution above all, and to rule in cooperation with Parliament. And that was known as the Glorious Revolution. So they have some stuff, you know, but like I said, it basically was cherry picking convenient facts to try to support that thesis. But the English they tried to claim that for one, because Spain had more of a Roman influence, that they were more patriarchal and I don't know, just paternalistic, but despotic government. And I don't know about that. I don't know if I buy that, because by 250 BC, when Spain was colonized by, or beginning to be colonized by Rome, they had a republic, and you had Spaniards who were allowed to be elected into the tribunes, into the representative body of the Roman Republic. And so, and then the Lex Hortensia, the Roman law, a lot of that is upheld under English law, and from English to ours. So we have a lot of Roman legacies of jurisprudence for people that go to law school to this day, just like Spain does. And for being patriarchal, right? You could make the argument that women in the Spanish Americas had more rights than women under the English Americas.
Mm.
Okay, especially when it came to property rights. They could maintain their property when they got married.
Oh,
And
okay.
under England, right, they had something called coverture, Coverture. And under the law of coverture, a woman's legal identity was covered by her husband. And so she couldn't represent herself in court. Her money that her mom and dad gave to her became his. He became the custodian of it. So yeah, you could make the argument that the English were more patriarchal than the Spanish. Let's see here. And then I point to an aristocratic government in number 2, right? And so remember, what was it like? Excuse me. It was like number 5 in the the Black Legend handout. And it was inequitable Spain. Remember all like the different Spanish offices and all that? Well,
Yeah.
here, same thing here. The gentryman, right? I mean, look at this. Beneath the royally appointed governor, so he's appointed by the crown, a seat as a councilman constituted the highest political office in Royal Virginia. Between 1680 and 1775, 2/3 of all councilman seats, okay, and yes, they were handpicked by the governor, were occupied by members of only 25 aristocratic families. Yikes. In 1724, all 12 sitting councilmen were blood-related gentrymen. Of Virginia's 170 historical councilmen, 152 were of the gentry class, and only 2 were not English. As for the majority of immigrants during the late 1600s and early 1700s, over 75% of the immigrants came as indentured servants. So you have a majority of poor people in Virginia. And then you have this aristocratic little clique of gentrymen who ruled the roost. And the stats were not that much better for the assembly. for the elected assemblymen. They were majority gentrymen as well. Let's see here. Yeah, fewer than 30% were artisans, merchants. Okay, and so they didn't have much of a bourgeoisie, people from the city and like middle class. They didn't have much of that. So it's like they had this gaping gap between the gentrymen who own lots of land and rule politically, and these ex-indentured servants who may or may not have received their freedom dues when their indenture was done. So much so that you had a rebellion, right? It was known as Bacon's Rebellion under a guy named Nathaniel Bacon. The people who never got their freedom dues, they headed west into the Piedmont region. And in the Piedmont, there were natives living there. So, of course, they start fighting with them. Governor William Barclay tells them they cannot do that, that he had just made a treaty of peace and trade, of course, trade with them, and he didn't want that disrupted by them fighting. And any future fighting would be considered treasonous. So they fought anyway. They defeated the Doeg tribe, and they knew they were as good as dead for treason. And so they marched to the capital, to Richmond, and they defeated the royal militia. And they declared a People's Republic of Virginia. And then Nathaniel Bacon got dysentery and died, their leader, and then it just fell apart. But yeah, you have like this combustible situation in English Virginia in the colonial era, an oligarchy of a few at the expense of the many. And remember, a lot of these indentured servants had been lured into voluntarily indenturing themselves because they were told they'd get the world once they were done. And it was always 3 to 7 years. But a lot of them got nothing when they were done. And so you raise the expectations of people, right? And what's also like really sad is the assembly met at the end of Bacon's Rebellion, and they basically they have it on, you know, in citation as a legal primary source from that time period. They contended that the white indentured servants and ex-indentured servants were a volatile group. Their expectations were too high, and if they didn't get what they wanted, they were a possibly rebellious demographic. So therefore, they said they ought to consider using the hardy but docile African slaves instead. And of course, the African slaves, you had a bad combination. This was in 1676, and pretty close to that time, you had the rise and fall of a couple different African empires back in Africa, and each of them, right, were led to an increase in prisoners that were captured. I can't remember which one. I want to say that the Ashanti, I think, crumbled, the Ashanti kingdom, and so people just came in and just like, you know, like ravens after, you know, a dying animal or something. They came in and swarmed and took a lot of prisoners. And then the rising one, I can't recall who it was. I'm sorry, because you had the Yoruba, the Igbo, the Congolese, Ghana. At any rate, one empire rose, and with its strong army, they began attacking enemies and making them pay tribute to the chief, and they also got more prisoners. So when more prisoners make it to the Caribbean, I don't recall what happened in the Caribbean, but the demand for them plummeted at this time in the Caribbean. Okay. And so now, sadly, even though they're human beings, you have a glut of slaves. You have way more than there is demand to buy them in the Caribbean. So sadly, if you think of it as a commodity, what happens is the price of that commodity goes down, right? When you have way too high of a supply and not enough demand. So now they became affordable. And according to the historian I was reading, he said that purchasing an indentured servant for only 3 to 7 years was about 3/4 of the price of paying for a slave. So you pay just 1/4 more, you get the person for life. And if it's a woman, right? If it's a woman, you get her children and her daughter's children and so forth.
Wow.
Because yeah, they made the status follow the mother. Okay, and so yeah, it's just a sad case. Most of the stuff I got, it was from an historian called David Breon Davis. David Breon Davis, and I want to say that the name of his book was Inhuman Bondage. So anyway, I'm saying, you know what? Were they really any better, the English?
Mm-mm.
And then now, yeah, that's what we get here. So see, the white indentured servants become, quote, unreliable and volatile. The price of slaves goes down. They developed a reputation for being hardy because a lot of them had engaged in rice cultivation on the Ivory Coast. And so they developed an immunity. Their antibodies had built up against malaria. So they weren't dropping dead from malaria like the Native Americans did, and like so many English and Europeans did. So that was another reason. And then of course also they said, just look at them when they get here with the coffers and the chains around their necks, etc. That they have no hope already. They have no expectations. So hence, because they're already broken, they're likely to be more docile, to do as they're told and not rebel. So it's a very cold-hearted, calculated decision to use these slaves.
Mm-hmm. But they didn't see it as something wrong.
Yeah, or at least they tried to act like there was nothing wrong, huh?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and then of course you have evidence right here of racism, starting with Aristotle, then this guy Ibn Khaldun in the Middle Ages, the Portuguese gentleman Gomez right here, and then there was a guy named Leo Africanus. He wrote a very popular book as well. He's somewhere in here. Leo Africanus. Anyway, he's here somewhere. But at any rate, they started the what would become later on to be the Sambo image, Sambo, right? And Sambo was a famous character and play in the antebellum period of the animal-like, happy-go-lucky, ignorant African man. Okay. If you want to find evidence on racism historically in the U.S., this guy's real big right now. He's younger than I am, and he's at a big school, and he's had a couple really big books published. Ibram Kendi. So at any rate, yeah. So, very likely it was both. It was economic self-interest and racism, right? That got them to embrace slaves. And then this is big to me right here, John Pori. This guy takes this racist stuff that was written from the Middle Ages forward, and he translates it and prints it. So now, right, they're like deliberately trying to foment racism in the South. For one reason, right, is it serves to justify enslaving them. And another one, right, was divide and conquer. You have evidence in, oh gosh, what is his name? I have it in here somewhere. But at any rate, there's a book that shows evidence that at the social level, at the taverns and inns and so forth, right, in the South during the colonial period, there was a lot of fraternization between poor whites and blacks. That they danced together, they drank together, sometimes they slept together, etc. And so there was a conscious effort by the authorities to put an end to that and to really segregate the black and white people in the South. So that's another part to it, right? Is they didn't want the poor whites and the poor blacks to unite, especially in rebellion. And so it was convenient to keep them divided. And then the Puritans, yeah, there were things about them that seemed progressive. They had elements of democracy. At the New England town hall meetings, any citizen could bring up a law, and it was 50% plus one popular vote to pass the law. You have what else? You had the popular election of the pastors and the popular election of removing them. You had the autonomy of each church, not being told what to do by a group of like elders or presbyters or bishops. You had the first public school system. It was called the Old Deluder Law. Deluder means deceiver. So isn't that funny? The first public school system was named after the devil. The Old Deluder, right, law is they contended, right, that the devil will be less likely to trick, to deceive our children if they can become literate and read the Bible for themselves. So needless to say, that elementary level education was highly religious in character. Right? The Pilgrims who came in 1620 to Cape Cod, they established a peace with the Wampanoag Confederacy. That is the famous Chief Massasoit, and William Bradford was a leader of the Pilgrims, and they had like the first Thanksgiving, and they signed a treaty of equality, and they kept the peace for 54 years. So for 54 years, there was no fighting, and they were on equal terms politically in their alliance. And so, but then, right, when you look at the Puritans who came 10 years later into Boston above them, the Puritans were a lot more controversial, a lot more. Firstly, they would sign a treaty of equality with no one, including the Pilgrims beneath them. They wanted everybody subordinated to them, and so that they had to pay some type of tribute to them. They only took 6 years to get in a war. It's called the Pequot War, and they were arrogant. They would not hand over Puritans guilty of infractions, even including murder, of Native Americans in the native territory. But when the natives committed any kind of crime against a Puritan, they demanded that the native be extradited to them so they could punish him. So it was a one-way street, and the Pequot got tired of it, so they had a war. And then after 54 years, when the Pilgrims fought the son of Massasoit, his name was Metacom, the Puritans weren't even asked to fight with them, and they jumped right in, and they attacked the Narragansett, and the Narragansett tribe were enemies of the Wampanoag. So when the Wampanoag were fighting the Englishmen, the Narragansett were like, this isn't our business. We don't care about the Wampanoag. Go ahead and defeat them. And so what do you know? The Puritans began taking Narragansett land. And then also another area where the Puritans were greedy was the Connecticut River Valley. In the Connecticut River Valley, again, that was Narragansett land. They began just squatting in large numbers and taking that fertile land. And they're the ones who had the Salem witch trials. They're the ones who had the idea of the covenant, coming from the Old Testament of the Bible with the Hebrews, right? Where God makes covenant with the Hebrews, and he tells them that if the people in the community are holy and they do as I asked, I'll bless the whole community. But if they began sinning and offend me, then I'm going to turn my back on the community. So they actually had select men, the Puritans, to go and spy on people in their homes to see if they were up to some kind of sinful behavior. Yeah, they were no joke. And of course, they banished several people for not thinking the way they did. They were very intolerant of dissent. Right. So anyway, I think that's it for that one. So I hope that kind of sounds familiar, what you derived from it. All right. And then when is your test due?
Tomorrow.
Oh my goodness. Okay.
Tomorrow's our test, yes.
Okay. Take a look at this. Look at the first few. All right. And tell me, do you have any questions? Feel free to take a couple minutes.
Okay. No, everything's pretty much in the sections that we've been
Okay,
reading
good.
about, right? Mm-hmm.
Good. I think so too.
Okay.
I think so
Yeah.
too. Let me see though. Let me look. There might be a few. Um, let's see. Number 6, the Spanish sources written, right?
Okay. Which of the following is false regarding the Spanish sources in 1500s reading class?
Yeah, so remember
Caesar.
we mentioned Las Casas. There's a whole section on him. Remember Castillo was the one who wrote La Historia Verdadera de la Conquista,
Mm-hmm.
as conquistador, saying he's given the true account. And so it was kind of a little bit more critical of the Aztec and contended that, things got out of control. But remember Sahagún, and remember that quote that I have in Spanish and English about him saying that it was the devil's fault that the Aztec were sacrificing their children to the rain and lightning god Tlaloc, and
Mm-hmm. Yes.
that they didn't have the light of Christianity, right? So if you take
Mm-hmm.
a look at C, did he insist that they continue in their religious practices? No, of course not. Okay, so just a little bit of inference on that one.
Okay.
Um, I think we've gone over 7 and 8. Let's see here. And 9 is in a handout. Um, let's see here. I'm reading number 10.
This point to the fact that
Yeah, this is almost a trick one because it seems all the above, but C is not correct. Spain definitely was not the only confederation of monarchies in Europe.
mm-hmm. So point the fact that Rome conquered and held Spain or Spanish initiating like Caesar was told to
Yeah,
eradicate.
I don't like that question. It's like I'm trying to
Right.
trick you. But see, A is wrong because of the religious intolerance.
Mm-hmm.
Remember Rome, right? They were not totalitarian. They did not try to dictate every aspect of the colonized lives. As long as they were willing to be loyal to the emperor, to Rome, to fight for them, to do public works for them, to pay their tribute and taxes to them, they didn't care what religion you were. Of course, until later on with Christianity. And so, yeah, so A is not true and C is not true. Okay. But yeah, I don't like that question. see here.
Which is the foreign translation Spanish deemed to be original.
Yeah, so you should be able to, when it talks about the two contradictions of the Spanish, the two ironies, it shows evidence of all of those, and it suggests that none of those was original, right? That Rome and the Umayyad Caliphate and others had done those things to them. And then I hope I conveyed for number 12, right? That I'm in the middle, subjectively as the instructor. I think there's no way you can or should ignore the Reconquista back in Spain and trying to understand the manner by which the Spaniards fought the Aztec and others, right? And saw it in terms of a holy war and all that. But I did try to convey that that thesis can be exaggerated. There were centuries of this holy war, and amidst those multiple centuries, 7 of them, there was coexistence, there was alliance, there was, you know what I mean? And so, yeah, so I think it's relevant, the Reconquista, but it can be, its relevance can be overstated. Right. So you have 13 and 14. You can get those. 15. Did the Spaniards deliberately spread smallpox? No, not that I know of. Okay. Okay, so 17 is kind of straight up. Number 19. I mentioned it briefly in the section that Children of Coyote is about the Spanish missions in California. And the thesis of it basically is inadvertent or almost accidental damage done to the ecosystem and to the culture and people of the native Californians. Okay. So it doesn't depict the friars as violent, ethnocentric despots. When Jesus came, the Corn Mothers went away. That is the conflict theory that I mentioned. That's the book I used to give a conflict history adhering to the Black legend about the Spanish in New Mexico. Okay. And yeah, it's very, very cynical. Coronado and Cabrillo, yes, they claim the far west. They both, yeah, claim the far west. So when you see Don Juan de Oñate, that's the initial leader of the expedition into New Mexico, and Ramon Gutierrez is the author of When Jesus Came, the Corn Mothers Went Away. Bless you. So yeah, so proven Don Juan de Oñate is depicted warmly, tolerant, and so forth. No way. No way. Right.
For which one?
The number 23.
Okay.
All right. Remember economic opportunities for the poor and those that were darker on the pigment chart. They could marry up, they could use the military and church, and they could gain a gracias al sacar note for some meritorious act, and then at the local level, they didn't need papers to do what they did for a living. The Spanish called it catching crumbs off the table. All right. So yeah, take a look at 26.
A rigid pigment autocracy. The Spanish had charged many customary placing certain ethnic combinations, specific level social and political pyramid communities of English and Muslims were their own categories to encourage to stay segregated within their own village repartimiento. Spanish kings and queens were not above issuing limpias statues trying to limit certain opportunities, position, and power. Even if earning enough money to pay their market price, naval slaves were seldom allowed to gain manumission. And the cost of immigrating was
So go ahead, hon.
would it be the Spanish kings and queens were not above issuing limpieza de sangre, claiming us, but
No, actually,
statues
that one is true. Yeah, all
okay.
three of the first three are true. But remember, the slaves were almost always allowed to purchase their freedom under the Spanish. Okay.
Okay. If earning enough money to pay their market price, naval slaves were seldom allowed to gain manumission.
Yeah, so that's the one that's not true. And then that also could help you with number 27 to know that number 27 is false.
Okay. As a historiographer of Spanish mission history.
Oh my goodness, I forgot a word right here. She was granted much land. Shoot.
She embraced the Catholic faith. Okay, right. Intimacy with the crown. She was granted much land. She in place nearly stole education for credit for loans.
So that's actually all true, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's all true of the Catholic Church. And I remember with a very simple watered down thesis on the Black Legend is on the missions, right? I just said it was all the above. There's a little bit of truth to court history, praising the Spanish friars. There's a little bit of truth to conflict history of them being a bit tyrannical and exploitative to the natives. There's evidence of native agency, and there's evidence of accidental or inadvertent damage. All of them. So number 30, what I shared with you, right, on the English, I mentioned everything but the last one. Remember the claims of King Charles I, he claimed to rule by divine right, and they beheaded him.
Mm-hmm.
So clearly, right, his actions and claims do not support Whig history. He was an enemy to the Whigs. And then we've done 31. Did I depict colonial Virginia as being more equitable, democratic, and progressive than the Spanish colonies?
The Spanish colors. So 31. More progressive than any of the Spanish colonies. Depicted. So
remember we talked about the gentry class rolling the roost and Bacon's rebellion of the poor. So clearly, right, it wasn't more equitable. It wasn't more democratic. It was just as inequitable as the Spanish colonies. Okay. With this one, no system of accountability existed. No, I said there was a system of accountability. Remember the juicio de residencia?
mm-hmm.
Yeah, so that one doesn't fit on 32. They did have a system of accountability. What avenues to power or advancement did the commoners not have? The first one is true. I didn't mention much of it. but you had a form of civil disobedience where you could say, I obey, but I don't comply. Cabildos, the city councils, and having cabildos abiertos, open meetings. Yes, that is all true. Local trade without the proper license. Yes, remember the Spanish called that crumbs off the table that they allowed. They had power to elect their own visitor generals. No, not that far. Yeah, that one definitely doesn't fit. Okay. And then 34, which of the following is false? English embrace of African slavery was depicted as emanating from both greed and racism? Absolutely. The Puritans were depicted as progressively respectful of Native Americans? No way. Remember how I depicted them? They were arrogant. They were arrogant and hateful toward the Native Americans.
The English are stated to have
All right. And then the English are stated to have made the institution of slavery deliberately difficult to escape. That is true, sadly. That is true. All right. So you feel okay about taking this?
I feel a lot better now. Yes.
Oh, good, good.
I
good.
do. Yes, I feel a lot better. I was nervous, so I just have to reread, and everything from the study guide is what's going to be on our test.
That's
so
right.
I see.
That's right.
Yeah.
So have all of your argumentative assignments handy that you could look to, okay?
Okay.
Because almost everything is in those.
Yeah. Yes, there is a little bit of everything. So
All
I
right.
feel a lot more confident.
All right, good, hon.
Yeah, thank you so much.
You're very welcome. All right, so good luck with that. And I will yeah, have a good week, okay? And I'll see
Yes.
you hopefully next Tuesday.
Yes.
All right,
I'll
hon. Good
see you
luck.
then. Thank you so
Oasis.
much.
All right, you're welcome.
Alrighty. Bye. Have a good day.
Bye-bye. You too.